Hello, my name is Joan Redwing, and I'm the Chief of Application Development at Minute. And I have the honor of serving as the moderator for this session, Eat Your Veggies, the sixth session in our celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day. The state accessibility standards includes the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG version 2.0. We're now looking at whether we should include the next iteration of the guidelines, WCAG 2.1. Our speakers are going to talk about how Minute at Revenue decided not to wait for that and their experiences in working with WCAG 2.1. I'll let them introduce themselves. Lexi, you go first.
Hi, this is Lexi. I am a business analyst with Minute at Revenue. I'm also a Harry Potter enthusiast, a GIF aficionado, and I'm a parent of 2 young elementary school aged kids.
Thanks, Lexi. Now, John.
Hi, I'm John Watney. I'm a Java programmer at Minute, partnering with the Department of Revenue. I'm a Doctor Who enthusiast, both classic and modern, fair weather Friday bike commuter, and a parent of 2 young neurodivergent, very active twin boys.
Great. All right. Well, I'm excited to hear about your experience with WCAG 2.1. Take it away.
Thank you, Joan. So today we were invited to share with everybody our journey of implementing the WCAG 2.1 standards within web application development at Minnesota IT Services, partnering with Revenue. As we were planning this presentation, we realized how similar incorporating accessibility was to convincing our kids to eat their vegetables. With all personal growth, we realized that you have to take that journey to get where you're going. We start with avoidance, things like refusing to try unfamiliar things, not wanting to eat your broccoli. And then you slowly move into acceptance, where you realize that change is good and there are benefits to accomplishing different goals. Really realizing there's more than one way to eat broccoli, and maybe the other ways are better. And then finally coming to advocacy. This is where we are at now, when we've kind of figured out our recipe for success with Minute at Revenue. And now we'd like to share that with everybody every chance that we get. So I've outlined a little bit of our background that we've taken on this journey. As you can see, it hasn't been short. It's taken us a long time. But the things that we did poorly many years ago were important stepping stones to where we are today. Back in 2016, our Java development team had the opportunity to do a brand new application written completely from scratch. That was our audit room system. And at that point, we had a huge task ahead of us. And unfortunately, we treated accessibility as a nice to have feature. We told ourselves that we were doing our best effort, and we knew about keyboard testing, and to us at the time, it made it feel like we were doing what we needed to do. The next project that we had was rewriting an application that already existed. And by then, we had started to realize some of the mistakes in the way that we approached our thought on our last project. And John was a real advocate for all of our team, making sure that we put accessibility at a higher place in our priority, and always pointing out all of the significant areas for improvement that we had. So we definitely did better, but we have a lot of room to grow at that point. And then in 2020, we finally started a project where we revisited Audit Room, and the main goal at that point was explicitly to improve the accessibility of the application. We set out with a goal to do the best we could, use the most up-to-date standards that we could, which was the WCAG 2.1. And we wanted to create a template that all of the Java team's future work could be based off of, knowing the time investment of building something that's really accessible. we wanted to make sure that would pay off in the future as well and for other teams. So with that, we had permission from our business partners to start this project with the sole purpose to create and perfect that accessibility recipe. So now we're expanding and we're sharing those standards that we created with other teams and other groups. We're trying to create reusable requirements that our business analysis teams can use. Our QA teams are having consistent criteria that they can test for with accessibility. And then the developers have the benefit of reusable templates that they can start and they can apply to other applications as they do other work. There were a lot of challenges along the way. I don't want to make it seem like it was easy by any means, but we want to be really open with what those challenges were. The first thing was by far just the learning curve. There's a lot of information. Reading through the WCAG guidelines can be really overwhelming, especially at first. It can be hard to differentiate between what all of the options are and what really applies to the application that we're building at the time. So we spent a lot of time reading through that, understanding what the different standards meant, what guidelines applied under which situations. And it was during that analysis that John recommended going with 2.1, just because it made sense. The improvements that came in 2.1 applied to us. We knew it was the most recent thing and we wanted to start with that so we didn't have to go back and change things later. From there, the next challenge we faced was simply a lack of resources. There's a lot of information out there about how to create accessible Word documents or making sure web content is accessible, but not all of that applies to an online application. So we started with the form aspects of our applications. And then as we got more comfortable with the standards and with what we were working with, that's when we kind of expanded into other features and areas of our systems. And that brings us to the last challenge, which was applying what we've learned to different libraries and different elements of the system. One thing that really stands out in my mind is our calendar tool and our date pickers, which we struggled with a lot to get just right. As soon as the colors worked and met the AA criteria, now we had to go figure out how to navigate that with the keyboard and make sure it could be read through a screen reader. But it was worth the effort to put into that because that's a feature that exists in almost every application that our team was supporting. One of the other things we had to work with our business partners on was balancing the risk versus the reward. How much effort was worth putting into a feature to make sure that it was accessible. If our team wasn't confident that we could create this feature in a way that was available for everybody who might use the system, we didn't want to put it out there. So we were able to have those conversations, and our business partners did make some decisions to just move away and look for a different way to accomplish something in a way that we knew could be done and still meet the WCAG 2.1 guidelines that we needed to follow. So how confident are we? That was one of the other questions we had to answer for you today. And I think we're a lot more confident today than we were certainly a few years ago. But we followed a really natural pattern of growth. We started with recognizing we had a lot to learn. John was absolutely critical in that whole process. He was very patient and persistent and took leadership on the team to making sure everybody understood what the goal was and guiding people through the learning process. Then the team all kind of agreed together that we're willing to learn this and we're willing to put in the time that it takes to do this right. And then we took responsibility for that. Each of the developers on the team stepped into that uncomfortable area and took responsibility for their own code and making sure that they were doing the best work that they could. And then from there, we're at a more confident place now because we can lean back on all of those experiences. We can look at our templates, our notes from past projects, and we can apply those lessons to the work that we're doing moving forward. And so where are we today? Everybody on our team is recognizing the role that Minute staff play in making sure that the products that we're producing and supporting meet the standards for accessibility that are there to make sure everybody has an equal opportunity available to them. We're creating reusable templates, reusable requirements, essentially a buffet of features and designs that we know are accessible and meet the standards from the state guidelines as well as WCAG. We're continuously advocating throughout the entire software development lifecycle to ensure that accessibility is at the front of everybody's mind every step of the way. In the planning phases and estimating phases, we're looking at what effort there is out there to be able to bring something up to standards or what kind of features exist that might present a challenge. The design phase, accessibility is always at the front of the team's mind. And then as we implement and test, it's, you know, a critical piece of that as well. Our QA teams are in the habit now of always testing accessibility first and functionality later. All right, and now I'll pass it over to John. He'll tell you more of the actual details from a developer perspective.
Hello, this is John. The three key components to actually accomplishing this work was starting our code review process, using available resources, and using tools and libraries to our advantage and as a guide. We started with our developer code review sessions. This had us splitting the work up. Everyone was participating and learning and holding each other accountable. Then we had to find and use available resources, such as W3.org's, the World Wide Web Consortium, the WCAG 2.1 guide, and Google is our friend. You have to try many different search terms until you find the magic one, and then you just kind of find yourself diving down the rabbit hole. It's you know, you have sort of you might see like an error you see on an automated report of your accessibility, and you look into that and see, you know, you go to a Stack Overflow posting and it mentions some term, and then okay, what do other people say about this term? And that's how you can finally get to something that looks like it'll help you in your situation. And then finally, just incorporating tools into the review processes. We got into the habit of using 3 different browser plugins to check accessibility. The Wave tool from WebAIM, the Axe tool from DEC, and Microsoft's Accessibility Insights tool, which is sort of a fancier reskinning of the Axe tool, but includes some other nice little features like adding a tab order checker, which is pretty slick. Also, Chrome itself in its developer tools has its own accessibility checker baked right in. So that's another thing I'm going to have to start looking into as well. We find that it helps to look using different tools because each one has its own strengths and weaknesses, and sometimes you'll find something with one that the others don't report. So it's good to use multiple tools in addition to your manual testing. Next slide, please. Okay. So just some coding guidelines and observations from what we found digging into this. You really want to go for the simplest, most standardized solution to making things accessible. You want to use HTML5 attributes, such as specifying the field a label is for rather than using ARIA terms. Another example is using the button element that was introduced in HTML5 rather than, say, just taking a div and saying it has an ARIA role of button. By digging into the HTML5 specifications, reading about it, you find a lot of new, quote unquote, items that have been added since the old HTML 4.x that can really make life a lot simpler and keep your code shorter and lighter weight as well. And then another specific challenge where dynamic tables can be challenging to label. Now, you should use a table for tabular style data. I've been hearing for going on 2 decades now about how you should not use a table solely for formatting data. I mean, that's been posted for years now in design and accessibility blogs and so forth. But you have to, again, use a table for when it makes sense. Sort of our first pass at our ECRV application, electronic certificate of real estate value, when that was being rewritten. What was naturally tabular data, which was a set of dollar line items with a prior year and current year value, had originally been coded as a bunch of divs side by side, which was fine if you had the full width of a screen display. But as soon as you put it on a phone, they were just getting all rearranged and they did not line up, and it was just did not make any sense. And I would hate to think of trying to make any sense of it with a screen reader. So just switch it to a table. Now, unfortunately, sometimes tables wind up being fairly wide, so you might need to add a scrollable element to it, but just be aware of that. And again, going back to the tables, one good case for ARIA is to use ARIA labeled by, where you refer to the unique ID of both the row and column headers. Now, usually the number of rows varies with the filters and data that's backing the table. Just try to look at how the data elements are coded on the page, your JavaScript, jQuery, whatever code you're using, for guidance on constructing the unique row label identifiers. Usually we're looking at some sort of an array with an index. So take the same array index values and apply them to your row identifiers, and you'll be in good shape. Next slide, please. And I think it's time to hand it to Joan.
All right. Well, thank you so much, John and Lexi, for helping us celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day.